Welcome back to the Road to Autonomous mini-series. Today's topic will be autonomous and liability in China. Once again, I have Mark and Atticus to discuss a little bit about liability and how it relates to the autonomous sector. Uh, Atticus, would you like to go ahead and kick off who could be liable?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sean. That's liability issue is a complex issue and is one of the key topics. So who is liable? The end users because they use the car, or the hardware suppliers because they supplied one of the hardware, or it's the manufacturer because they produce the vehicle. In the context of autonomous driving, the infrastructure will also provide information, cloud basis. So will the providers of infrastructure will also be responsible, and also in autonomous driving, software will be a major part of the car. So will software developer will also be responsible, and also the stakeholder also include the insurance company. So when an accident happen, will the insurer will also be responsible? So that are complex issues that I think this has been discussed all over the countries in other jurisdictions.
So just on that, I think the thing will be, firstly, liability is going to be obviously a big issue, but we should also keep in mind that autonomous cars will likely lead to many less accidents because humans are not very good at driving. And so I think that's the first issue. And then I think the issue will be, when we think about who's liable, we tend to always think of an accident, because I think an autonomous car will be very similar in many ways to a mobile phone. But if something happens with your mobile phone, it doesn't necessarily mean you have an impact at 60 miles an hour into a wall or something. So so obviously it's less stark. So I think the issue will be cars by their nature. You could argue that autonomous vehicles will probably have a slightly more simple supply chain than the traditional vehicles. But when we have a liability case, there will be a lot between hardware suppliers and software developers, because, like Atticus said, software will have an outsized impact on the cars. But if we're talking about actual accidents involving people in cars, I think the issue will be that, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, probably most countries will come up with an insurance-based solution, because it's going to be too difficult to tell consumers that. I think the main thing is, for the industry, they will want to make sure that people are covered. So so I think it's like a universal insurance for passengers. Is perhaps the main thing, and then these other issues about liability, they will be complicated. I think really we put it there in the comments. Software will be one of the major issues. So will you need to patch the software? What happens if you don't update your software? I think many people don't update their software on their phones immediately because they're worried about it not working properly or slowing it down or something like that. So what happens in those cases if the consumer didn't do the update? Will they be liable? So I think it really will depend on the actual circumstances of a specific case.
And I think you mentioned, Mark, that other countries are doing something or are also regulating this area. Would you like to go and give us a little bit of background on maybe some other jurisdictions?
Yeah, so I mean, this whole series is about China, which is what we're working on. But so basically our understanding on other main jurisdictions, and we've picked places where we also have offices. So Germany, the US, and the UK. And so it's interesting. Germany and there's a new law coming out allowing for level 4 autonomous cars on the road soon. So Germany, even though we often think it's a conservative country, it is actually moving quite quickly in autonomous cars. And that's obviously because the importance of the car industry there. They maintain the general liability principle. And it will be a question because, autonomous driving will not be something that just appears one day from nothing to fully autonomous vehicles. So there'll be different levels. And I think, in the German law, it seems that the driver will be generally liable and it will depend on the mode of the level of autonomous driving. And there will be like a black box type system, like, you know, with a plane, so you can work out what happens. And there's still an obligation on the driver to take over if the system warns him to. So I think, yeah, the issue will be, it will be incremental. So there'll probably be a long time. If you look at some of those Teslas now, you know, you don't need to be fully engaged when you're driving, but you need to be engaged enough, you know, like Siri or Alexa, that you spring in when the vehicle tells you to spring in. So I think that's the German approach. The US approach, it varies from state to state. And I think it's, you know, mostly it can be on negligence level, but there's also some states no fault liability or even strict liability. And it seems to me that, you know, the way that countries are looking, or states are looking at the liability issue, will really depend on how important the auto industry is for them. So like we just said, Germany's got a very big auto industry. So, you know, they are pushing that liability system. In the US, states like Michigan and Tennessee, which have manufacturers, they have liability systems which are very pro-manufacturer, whereas Massachusetts and New York, you know, they will have a strict liability. So they make it much tougher. The manufacturer will be held liable, you know, no matter what happens in strict liability. And then the UK has a bit of a different approach, which is personally, I feel it's the right kind of approach. And that would be what I just talked about before, a bit like universal coverage for passengers and for people. And that kind of is also how a lot of countries do solve third-party liability for driving at the moment. So the liability will be primarily on insurance, and then it'll extend, you know, to automated vehicles. And the insurers, of course, will always step into the shoes of the claimant, so they can then have recourse against the manufacturer. And the reason why I think this is the best way of doing it, it takes away the fear of, you know, driving in an automated world, which I also said I think will lead to reduced insurance claims because there'll be less accidents. So I think the UK system has a lot to go for.
Thanks a lot for that, Mark. I think you hit the point that none of these regulations are coming out from isolation. I think China especially will look towards other countries and see how they're handling their autonomous regulations and then adopt it for a China market. With that said though, Atticus, what do you think, based off of some of these other countries' approaches to autonomous, what do you think that China will do?
Yeah, I think there's no exception that China also, you know, facing this issue. But currently, I think there's a lot of discussions in the industry from the, you know, association sponsored by the Chinese government, and also law school professors and from lawyers. So there are a lot of discussions. But indeed, as Mark mentioned earlier, that it's complex because there's a different level of automation, and people may find that it's you know, in a dilemma that's for level 3, because in this level, and people needed to take over and to watch the, you know, the driving environment and the driving situation, and also, you know, there is a system in driving. So a lot of OEMs may find that it's just you know, a lot of difficult, you know, to do this. And I heard that one of the OEM have dropped idea to produce level 3 autonomous driving because it's too complex for liability. But still, I think from the legislation perspective, the government will regulate this. But currently, there's no proposal how can the authority can do that. So people are thinking that, you know, considering current liability regime of China, you know, we're based on tort and public liability. So generally speaking, that if among between the vehicles, there will principle of at fault will apply, and if between the vehicle and the pedestrian, the presumed fault will apply, so that the pedestrian or individual will be protected. Whether, you know, for the autonomous driving, these principles will also apply to. It depends on the level of automation. So we still need to wait and see the technology goes more mature and safer, and the government how want to regulate this.
Yeah, so I think on that, I think one of the issues will be when we look at the liability issue, we act like we're going to discuss it here and now, and it will be forever. But like Atticus mentioned, it will evolve over time, much like the cars evolve over time and the level of automation evolves over time. So I think, we do have a liability system that can deal with today's issues. So I think if we would have third-party insurance for every passenger, and obviously pedestrians, because the pedestrian, unless he jumps out on the road, he won't be at fault. So I think that is something that'll work. But we also have to keep in mind, probably within 5 to 10 years, people won't have driver's licenses, or you will need a very special driver's license, to actually drive a car. Probably very few people will own cars. Probably it will be all fleets. And I think once you change the car from being an individual's form of transport to being something that you use like public transport to a degree, or a taxi service, the liability issue will change. It will change from, worrying about what the driver does, because there will be no driver. And at the moment, we're still kind of wrestling with that concept. So I think, if the driver doesn't take over when the machine tells him to, then he may face issues from the insurer, but the person in the other car should be covered by a third-party liability insurance.
And I see one of the points here is that we expect China to follow Germany or Michigan in their approach to liability, meaning that it's pro-business. Is that related to China's increasing role as a auto manufacturer, or are there other reasons behind that?
Well, I just think it's kind of clear. The NDRC, which is the body in charge of dealing with China's industrial strategy, has said that laws need to change to allow way for automated vehicles. So I think China is betting a lot on being a leader of the new technologies, and I think for that reason, you expect them to follow a pro-business approach, something which obviously not putting people's lives unnecessarily at risk, but we're not talking about promoting accidents. We're just talking about, if there are accidents, how people are covered. So I think probably the manufacturers will face less scrutiny, and it will be either the state through insurance, or the insurance companies themselves, and then that's passed on to the broader community. That seems to me to make sense, because otherwise, if you make it too tough for the manufacturers, it's going to be difficult for them to find the investment. And we've got to remember also, with vehicles, I don't think anybody knows what's going to be happening. I mean, it's such a sector which is, has a potential to be disrupted. We don't even know if the big car makers of today will be there in 10 years. We don't know. It's a bit like, mobile phones or handsets. We don't know who's going to be the big company. Will it be like a Google who runs the software? Will it be the manufacturer who'll be like a hardware manufacturer? It's very difficult. And I think, if you're asking companies to make these big bets, if you saddle them with really unlimited liability, it's going to be hard for them to make those kind of investments.
Yeah, I agree with Mark that the Chinese government also wants to encourage the development of autonomous driving technology. So if we put on the more liability responsibility on the manufacturers, they will feel this pressure, and may not good for the development of this technology.
Yeah, and I think we are seeing something similar, not necessarily with autonomous, but other alternative energy vehicles, especially electric vehicles, and how to recharge batteries. These types of parallel industries. Yeah, I think there is something to say in how the government has been addressing those sectors as well. So we can see a little bit of a trend with the how other countries are handling the regulations, but also how China may as well. With that said, thank you both for this episode. If you have any additional questions, Mark and Atticus' email is on the screen, and you can check out other videos in our series in the YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching.